We have here, the slides I brought here are from a 4-hour workshop presented at the annual conference of the International Council of Psychologists. And that basically, it was, the focus of the workshop was that a multidisciplined approach and scientific analysis of the problems that the psychology and the neurology community has gathered about computer use and internet use might in itself illuminate some possibilities for greater understandings of how to deal with those problems. And there's a lot of problems. So here what I've done here is I've tried to correlate the problems into 4 areas. The physiological, which is mostly about the immobility. You have Grieg and the Dietz research and pediatrics and Tucker on obesity and movement. Yeah, repetitive strain injuries, eyes, the stress that comes from there. At the sociological level, the nature of interactivity, our people is e-social, asocial. What kind of problems? The faceless encounters, digitized human beings. Are they really human beings? How do we react with it? Normalizing deception. The fact that 60% of the information people exchange on the internet is usually not true, simply because this is an opportunity for a false face. We're talking about how this impacts all the rest of the psyche and your whole experience with computers generally. At the intellectual level, the false authority, technological positioning. It's the computer, it knows everything. Okay, as for the information limits, all the information is there, it's not. Okay, it says even the belief that all the font of human knowledge could actually be put on the internet is a thing that distorts our thinking, and at an intellectual level really isn't there. And what is accessible or available? 8 corporations own 95% of all the print and electronic media in the world. 8 corporations, they all have interest in nuclear power, they all have interest in this. There's some things they don't want you to talk about. And when you do a retrieval on a search and you get 120, you get 120,000 of this and 1.2 million of this, the students are only going to look at the first 20 anyway. Okay, and if Google, which is takes the most useless of the most useless, what Google does anyone here familiar how Google works technically? Okay, I want you to know Google right now, what Google has done is it has streamlined, it has become the McDonald's of all thought process. It tells you that, oh, we're going to automate this process for you. So when the search engines, where you can buy your way to the top, okay, is and if your throughput is high, you're at the top. And if you happen to be on a shared server subdivided somewhere in India and you're the expert on Gandhi, you're never even going to show up on any of the search engines. All the search engines combined access less than 1/2 of 1% of the pages. They index less than 1/2 of 1%. And Google says, okay, the most common responses, the ones that these search engines hit the most are these ones. So we're going to take those common ones and sift them to the top so everybody gets the same thing now. You get less and less variety out of what you're searching for. So at an intellectual level, that's really important because these things all affect the rest of the psychology of how we respond. And finally, at the psychological, we're going to look at the cognitive, the emotional, and the neurological issues that limit or control or even do damage to us when we're accessing computers, when we're using computers, when we're accessing the internet. All these other issues, the physiological, sociological, intellectual, all feed into it, and they'll show. So I'm going to go pretty fast here because I want to have some time at the end for some questions. The psychological is where we're going to focus on. If we have time, we'll go back to the other ones, because this is where it's really happening here. We're going to start off at the cognitive level here, which is really about perception and state of consciousness, how we perceive. Emotional, which is about context and relationship. Is this something we're really tuned into? Are we playing it at a superficial level? Do we relate to it? Do we not relate to it? That tells us if we're going to learn something from it. Neurological, at the electrochemical and central level, our brain burns up to 30% of the calories we burn in our body. Doesn't say much for me right now, but I want you to know there's a lot of electricity there, and there's a lot of flutter and wow that can happen in that process, and it's very important. And finally, the psychodynamic, the convergence of these. Cognitive is how we perceive, emotional, how we associate, the neurological, how we process, psychodynamic, how we change. Even at a cellular level, we can send messages to change the growth patterns of our toes. Life in master control. The Cohen belief that the internet is the universal authority and resource is one of the really damaging things going on there, because having this perception, okay, it affects everything the students are going to do in the school. If they're in front of a computer, they're not thinking about just the context and the content of the schoolwork. They're thinking about their entire encounter with that computer. And their mind probably isn't on the computer most of the time. Part of their mind is probably distracted in their email or their addictions or all the other stuff which we'll get onto. And the worst thing about the belief in the universal authority, at that point, we shut off our listening. What we get from there is enough. Our brain shuts down. It doesn't want to take in anything else, and it actually puts up limits. It puts up walls. Desensitization. Okay, there's another one that's really important, because this changes our relationship with things. As the popularity of graphics games grows, and there's a couple Americans involved in this, Larry Rosen and Michelle Weil, did a really good thing talking about how the adrenaline and all the energy coming out of these video games that the kids are into, puts them into a state of really heightened thing. They go to school, they're on their computers, they're not interested because it's not thrilling enough, they're not getting the chemicals, they're going to start misbehaving just to get those chemical rushes back. And these are empirical studies done in California that really do have a point. The interface, the pathological distraction, it is unlimited. It says it's amazing how much we can be distracted by it. I'm going to use as an example here what we call the functional dis-ease. That's where the language comes from. I'm Canadian, and we tend to have a global context. We've been standing trying to keep balance between China and England for 100 years of their wars, between the United States and Russia through their Cold Wars. We have direct flights from my city, Calgary, to Havana, and it says on a regular basis. So it's, it's a very global perspective I'm going to take here, but this is, in the context of dis-ease, it's about what we put into the system. Because using computers is mostly about lists and menus, processing lists and menus. There's studies here, are going to go after Perlman and Hornoff. I'm going to, on the discs, you're going to find lots of footnotes. I'm going to try and go past those, which talks about the fact that numbers process more easily and faster than words. Numerically arranged numbers, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, process faster than words or randomly arranged numbers. Alphabetically arranged words, apple, bird, cat, dog, elephant, faster than randomly arranged numbers. And finally, randomly arranged numbers process faster than randomly arranged words. Reviewing, numerically arranged numbers, best. Randomly arranged words, worst. Most menus, randomly arranged words. Okay, it says, how bad can we start? We couldn't do worse than that. Okay, and we compound the problem. Okay, we perceive in context. Feng Shui is really about distraction. When you're standing at the top of a mountain and you feel very high, it's not about the oxygen. Our primate brain, if we're standing back and forth across, Wendy and I have the same skill set up here, and we're accountants doing the same accounting problems, she's going to make 14% more mistakes than I make. At least 14% more. Why? She has her back to the doors. I have my back to the wall. Okay, her primate brain is going to be sending extra electricity to her ears to hear someone coming up from behind, extra electricity to her nose so she can smell, tons of electricity onto the skin, the biggest organ. Okay, he says, me, I got peripheral vision. He says, no problems at all. Okay, see, a lot of her electricity is busy. Okay, there's what's called saccades. When we look at something, when we look for something, we look for a bubble, we examine all the bubbles around it to make sure what we found is the right thing, called association and saccades. Each time we search on a word, we also examine the other words along there. A saccade is a little spasm. The eyes jerk around, takes about 60 milliseconds, 60 thousandths of a second. Our brain takes about 200 milliseconds, a fifth of a second to say that's not the one, and we go on. So when we're looking for something, we're doing a process, we do a saccade, and we go down, and our eyes, even though if the second thing we see is what we're looking for, our eyes still continue to travel, okay? Because this is just natural. So even though we've spent here, okay, this has taken 40 40 little saccades to get to this point. Now we have a process we're trying to do. We're going through there. Those 40 things may only have taken us 5 seconds, even if it's a new thing. If it's something we're familiar with, we still do the saccades. The difference is, and it's not the time, the 60 milliseconds to 200 milliseconds, it's the 40 interruptions. It says, where do we find the depth of our thought? We look for depth of thought because we contact our body, we contact every other sensibility when we're learning, when we're trying to do something, and instead what's happening is we're playing at a superficial level. There's this constant distraction that keeps us in a very narrow shell. So we're on there and we process, but we don't think. The kids are processing, but they don't think. The adults process, but they don't think. And what's worse, they go to work, they start processing and processing, they come home and they process with their family, they don't think. They process with their family, they don't feel. Because feeling takes the depth of thought and consciousness, which integrates our system. We have to be in contact with our whole system to really feel. We lose that feeling, we lose that sensation. What does that do to our learning? He says, heaven forbid. Sort of, this is what we want to read, this is what we're going to be distracted by. Okay? Maybe less distraction than all those little saccades, but this is the way it works. It says sort of we have constant distractions. Programs are being designed by programmers. Software people are the software now is transcended beyond that, but it's still being designed by people who are into computers. Peripheral content lowers the attention factors, simple as that. 70% is high effort when you're scanning something, 50% less, 30% less, 15% of it is a glance. I started off as a newspaper editor. I worked my way through high school in a daily newspaper. I was making more than my teachers. I was a hyperactive little kid. It says I was writing, and by the time I was 15, the American magazines were buying my stories. By the time I was 16, I was a newspaper editor. When we designed a page, we were conscious that there's lots on that page. You better make that column awfully narrow. It says we should learn, and that's basic. Our computers haven't gotten even to a basic level in this kind of understanding. This is about degree of distraction. How are we going to get any level of depth when we're that distracted? At the emotional level, oh, there's another one. This is one of my faves. It says, like I said, we associate the computer as a holistic entity. Okay, kids sit there, and they're sitting in front of their computers at school, and a big chunk of their brain is still playing a video game. A big part of their brain might be checking out the email. Okay, so it's a singular image. The impact of this is that we have to start designing with these things in mind. So when we go through some of these things here at the emotional level, it's really about context and relationship. Now, I'm a big fan of Charles Truax, who's worked with Carl Rogers, developed theory of interpersonal skill development. What makes a teacher work: warmth, empathy, and genuineness. It creates consciousness, trust, security, and believability in the students so they're able to absorb. Okay, context and relationship is really important. And we start off and look at internet computer addiction. The pathological internet use, PIU, has become a new industry, and it is an industry for some. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it, but like any other addiction, okay, the drug is content, the habit is connectivity. We're so into it, we're addicted. We like to hold on to it. There's lots of warning signs, and there's a couple of them in there. Now, you'll find it on your CD, so I don't have time for all these things, but just know that there's the first couple. If you're working in the internet industry, they're not a worry, okay? But when you start buying things online, which you wouldn't buy when you're offline, you start doing things up there that you wouldn't do in your normal life, it becomes a distraction. We turn back to the pathological distraction. The first distraction is from the screen. The second distraction is the distraction from a healthy life.